The first sensation she feels is a deep, bone-chilling cold, as if she has been absent from her own body for an eternity. Slowly, the sounds of the hospital invade her ears, the constant beeping of machines, muffled whispers, and the occasional hurried footsteps echoing in the corridors. Her heavy eyelids, still accustomed to darkness, struggle to open. Bit by bit, she makes out the pale lights and white ceiling typical of a hospital. Each heartbeat brings a whirlwind of emotions mingled with the confusion consuming her. She tries to move, but her body responds with painful slowness, as if her muscles have forgotten how to function. After a few moments, her fingers twitch, and the faint sensation of touch begins to return. In her mind, fragmented memories intertwine. A distant party, a familiar voice, perhaps her daughter's. A wave of shock hits her as she realizes how much time has passed, how much of her life slipped away during the coma. Now, as she struggles to understand what brought her back, a silent anguish washes over her, as if sensing something deeply wrong, something unsettling awaiting her discovery. As her senses gradually awaken, she hears muffled voices outside her room. At first, it feels like a dream, but as she focuses, she recognizes one voice too well. It's her daughter's. There's something chillingly distant in the tone of the conversation, making the elderly woman's heart tighten. Unintentionally, her ears catch the words, "Yes, finally, I can enjoy everything she saved. All these years waiting, and now, with her out of the way, I have nothing to fear anymore." Her world freezes. It feels as if a sharp blade pierces her chest, shattering her from within. Every word sounds cruel, cold, as though she is nothing more than an obstacle, a shadow to be erased. The sweet girl she raised, loved, and sacrificed so much for, was now speaking about her death as if it were an opportunity. She grips the sheets tightly, her trembling fingers clenching. Thousands of memories, of love, childhood, and shared smiles, flash before her eyes in seconds. The betrayal seems almost impossible to process, like a cruel trick of fate, but the words she heard confirm the painful reality. Tears well up in her eyes, but she holds them back, letting the hurt and disappointment slowly transform into something else. Still reeling from what she overheard, the elderly woman allows the weight of those words to settle in her heart. The pain of betrayal burns in her chest, an open wound she struggles to comprehend. How could her own daughter, the one she raised, loved, and supported with every fiber of her being, turn into a stranger, someone who now awaited her death as a cause for celebration? She recalls the sleepless nights, the times she worked tirelessly to provide the best for her daughter, the moments of affection and connection they once shared. Each memory, once a source of comfort, now feels like a cruel illusion. Her mind races, desperately searching for an explanation. Had she failed as a mother? When over all those years, had her daughter turned into someone she could hardly recognize? But as shock and sadness engulf her, she realizes how weak she is. Her body is still recovering from the coma, barely strong enough to sit up, and her hands tremble. She knows she is in no position to act or confront her daughter now. She is vulnerable, confined to the walls of a hospital, fragile and powerless. Yet, a flicker of determination begins to ignite in her eyes. Confined to the silence of the hospital room, the elderly woman lets an avalanche of memories wash over her. Her thoughts drift back to the beginning of her journey, to the early days of building her fortune. She remembers the countless hours of work, the sacrifices made, and the personal renunciations that accumulated like puzzle pieces, now forming an unclear and questionable picture. Each achievement crosses her mind as a triumph, but under the shadow of this cruel revelation, she wonders, what was the cost of all that success? Amid the frenzy of her accomplishments, the applause and society's approval, she recalls the little girl who spent more time with a nanny than her mother, the teenager who questioned her absence, and the young woman who looked at her with a mix of admiration and resentment. Was this what she worked so hard for? To create a chasm between herself and the only family she had? By prioritizing financial success, had she let something precious slip through her fingers? The realization weighs heavily on her. Perhaps, unknowingly, she had pushed her daughter toward this blind ambition, this obsession with inheritance and power. A bitter sensation fills her chest. What was the point of the empire she built, the wealth she accumulated, if it was now turning her into a prisoner of a solitary fate? When she least expects it, a familiar figure enters the room. It's Miguel, the family's longtime driver, a man whose face bears the marks of time but whose gaze remains honest and loyal. He had worked for her for years, witnessing the rise of her fortune and the construction of her legacy. Seeing her so fragile, his eyes expressed genuine compassion, bringing her a small measure of comfort. Miguel approaches cautiously, noticing the sadness etched on the elderly woman's face. He sits beside her bed, listening in silence, giving her the space to unburden herself. With a trembling voice, she shares her grief and the shock of discovering her daughter's true intentions. With each word, she feels a little lighter, as though finally being understood in all her pain. He doesn't interrupt, he simply listens intently, absorbing every emotion she releases. When her words finally come to an end, Miguel takes her hand and, with conviction, promises to support her. He offers not just a friendly presence but unwavering loyalty, a pillar of trust in a moment when her world seems to be collapsing. The elderly woman feels a flicker of hope reignite. Miguel, the man who had always stood on the sidelines of her life, now reveals himself as a precious ally. With him by her side, she begins to see a way to regain control and face what lies ahead. Still shaken but now resolute, the elderly woman and Miguel start to devise a plan. Every step is filled with tension, as both know that if her daughter suspects anything, their efforts could be destroyed before they even begin. The elderly woman understands she must tread carefully. The strike must be both subtle and decisive. Speaking softly, her eyes watching the hospital corridor, Miguel suggests a strategy. He would quietly begin gathering documents and assets in her name, transferring financial control back to a private account. He also promises to investigate which assets are still directly tied to her and which may have been stolen or redirected by her daughter during the coma. But the elderly woman knows this is just the beginning. More than regaining her fortune, she wants to reclaim her position, her dignity, and the respect of those around her. Together, they decide that she will slowly recover her health, preparing to make a public appearance at just the right moment to create maximum impact. Until then, Miguel will serve as her eyes and ears. Every conversation is meticulously calculated, every step carefully planned. The two become partners, accomplices in a journey of justice and redemption. Amid the pain, she discovers a courage she never knew she had, knowing the real battle is just beginning. Reclaiming her life and legacy means not only defeating her daughter but also overcoming the vulnerability that the coma imposed on her. One quiet afternoon, her daughter enters the hospital room without even bothering to hide her disdain. The elderly woman decides it's time to make her first move. Speaking carefully but sharply, she begins to drop subtle hints. She mentions, almost offhandedly, the lost time in the hospital and the irony of being so well cared for by her daughter during the coma. Each word is deliberate, carrying weight and intent. Her daughter, catching the insinuations, rolls her eyes and responds with biting coldness. "Oh, mother, you should be grateful I was here for you, handling everything while you were gone." She spits out the word responsibilities with sarcastic emphasis, making it clear that her mother's return is more of an inconvenience than a relief. The elderly woman, however, remains unfazed. This reaction only confirms her suspicions. Her daughter, sensing a challenge, steps closer and stares her mother down. "Do you really think you can take everything back? Look at you. You can barely stand without help." With a bitter laugh, she adds, "Sometimes, mother, you need to know when to accept your fate. Sensible people do." The sting of those words cuts deep, but the elderly woman keeps her composure, feeling her resolve strengthen. Little does her daughter know that underestimating her only fuels her determination. This initial confrontation makes one thing clear to both of them. The elderly woman has no intention of surrendering, and her daughter is ready to do whatever it takes to maintain control. Shortly after the confrontation, the elderly woman discreetly gathers more information about what happened during her coma. Miguel, her loyal ally, brings devastating news. Her daughter, fully convinced that her mother would never wake up, had already started selling off family assets. Each word feels like a blow. She thinks of the sentimental items, the properties she worked so hard to build. The thought of seeing them, not just as material possessions but as pieces of her life story, treated as mere transactions, deepens her anguish. What once symbolized years of hard work and security for her family was now being dismantled, sold, destroyed. The elderly woman feels the weight of betrayal. It's not just her daughter's greed, it's the disregard for the memories and meaning these possessions held. She realizes the situation is far graver than she imagined. There's no more time for hesitation. If she doesn't act now, she risks losing everything. She takes a deep breath, looking at Miguel with renewed determination. The time for waiting is over. She knows that to protect what remains, drastic measures will be necessary. Determined to safeguard her legacy, the elderly woman meets with Miguel in the stillness of a late hospital night. The tension in the air is almost palpable. They both know that every detail of their plan must be executed flawlessly. Together, they outline the steps needed to secure her assets, transferring control back to her and severing her daughter's access to the inheritance once and for all. Each decision is a deliberate move toward a clean break. She reviews documents, examines protective clauses, and discusses strategies to ensure not another penny can be taken from her. Though the emotional toll of what lies ahead weighs heavily on her, she feels an unexpected sense of calm. The maternal bond that once seemed unbreakable has now given way to a survival instinct, a fight to honor her own life and history. Miguel, ever steadfast, reassures her that he will stand by her side every step of the way. Despite her fragility, the elderly woman feels a newfound strength, a sense of justice finally within reach. For the first time in what feels like forever, she begins to take back control of her life. With the plan in place, she allows herself a moment of reflection. The decision she is about to make may forever sever her relationship with her daughter, but she knows it is the only choice to preserve the dignity of everything she has built. With steady but heavy steps, the elderly woman walks down the corridor leading to the attorney's office, a place she had visited many times before but which now carries a new significance. As she enters, she takes in every detail of the formal environment, as if marking the beginning of a new chapter in her life. The watchful eyes of the attorney, who has known her for decades, reflect deep respect. He understands the gravity of her visit. Seated before a desk piled with documents, she feels a mix of anguish and relief. She is about to rewrite the future of her fortune, redirecting everything she painstakingly built to ensure no one, not even her daughter, can dismantle it. With pen in hand, every signature becomes an act of resistance, a symbol of her courage in making decisions many would hesitate to consider. The attorney reads each clause aloud, and with every adjustment she feels her plan taking shape. The pain of betrayal still burns, but it is now overshadowed by renewed strength, as if revising these papers is an act of liberation. Deep down, she knows this choice will create an even greater distance from her daughter, but for the first time she is at peace with the consequences. No longer a victim of circumstance, she has become the author of her own destiny. Sitting in an imposing armchair in the mansion's drawing room, the elderly woman waits for her daughter to arrive. The silence is heavy, almost as if the walls are whispering old secrets. When her daughter enters, exuding her usual air of superiority, she notices how much things have changed. She is no longer the vulnerable woman who awoke from a coma. She is someone shaped by pain and resilience. When her daughter sits, the elderly woman holds her gaze, firm and solemn. Without preamble, she begins to speak, revealing that she has uncovered every act of betrayal, from the cold conversations about her death to the attempts to sell off the family assets. At first, her daughter tries to dismiss it all, shaking her head as if it were an exaggeration. But as she realizes her mother is unrelenting and aware of every detail, her demeanor shifts. A look of defiance crosses her daughter's face, and she bursts into accusations, claiming her mother never valued her, that work and money always mattered more. The elderly woman listens silently. But instead of responding with hurt or excuses, she calmly states that her choices were made to preserve a legacy, and that past mistakes do not justify present greed. Finally, the elderly woman announces that she has taken all necessary legal measures to protect what is hers and that nothing remains in her daughter's name. The shock on her daughter's face is unmistakable. She yells, desperately trying to reverse the situation, but her words have no effect. The mother watches, devoid of anger or hatred, with only a quiet certainty: she is free. She has accepted her flaws but also given herself a second chance. The elderly woman walks slowly to the door, feeling the weight of the decision she has just made. Each step echoes through the house, filling the space with a sense of finality. She pauses for a moment, glances at her daughter, now silent, and realizes that despite everything, love still exists somewhere within her, though bruised and unrecognizable. A part of her wants to embrace her daughter, to find a sliver of affection, but she knows that any gesture like that now would feel like returning to a place where she no longer belongs. Memories flood her mind, shared laughter, moments of pride, her daughter's fleeting childhood. She feels a pang of sorrow at how much has changed. Yet, at the same time, there is relief. A sense that, by finally putting an end to this relationship, she is reclaiming a part of herself she had lost. In a firm but gentle voice, she bids her daughter farewell, wishing her a life where she might find her own path, free from the shadow of wealth. Without waiting for a response, she turns and steps out the door, feeling the cool air as she leaves the house. It is a definitive goodbye but also a new beginning, a choice for peace, for self-respect, and for the future she wants to create. Alone now in her quiet home, the elderly woman allows herself a moment of pause. The pain of betrayal still lingers, but a newfound peace envelopes her, as if she has finally reconciled with herself. She walks to the window, gazing at the garden where so many memories were made, and takes a deep breath, savoring the fresh air. Looking up at the sky, she reflects on all the choices she has made, those she is proud of and those she regrets. She feels that every step has led her to this moment, where, despite the losses, she has found her strength. She sits down, picks up a notebook and pen, and begins outlining the new direction for her wealth. The burden of money, once so central, now carries a different meaning. She decides that a portion of her fortune will go toward causes that promote goodness, helping people who, unlike her daughter, would never betray her for riches. She wants her life to leave a mark beyond the walls of her home, a legacy that might inspire kindness in others. A sense of relief washes over her. The cycle has closed in a way she never imagined, with an act of generosity and love for the world, rather than resentment or bitterness. She knows that, despite everything, she has made the right choice, not just to preserve her dignity but to sow something greater than herself. Closing the notebook, she smiles softly, ready for what lies ahead, knowing her legacy will be one of compassion and strength, a reflection of the woman she has always been and will continue to be. Did you like the story? Comment below what you thought of this story, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this.